Superheroes. The genre that dominates the cinema, but at the same time causes fatigue among fans. Perhaps we are facing a new era of cinema, and just as it happened to the westerns, superheroes will fade into the background. But before that, they enjoyed a popularity never seen before thanks to ambitious projects like the MCU and DC's attempt with its cinematic universe. Warner may have had a lot of mistakes, but their movies made a mark on millions of fans. As popular as they are, neither the Avengers nor the Justice League started this phenomenon. Actually, it all started with more hidden superheroes, ones kept in the shadows by their mutations. The X-Men. Before the mutants, superheroes barely had space in the cinema, mainly because the resources of that time were limited to show all their greatness. The closest were the films of the Lone Ranger, Flash Gordon, and Dick Tracy, comic book vigilantes who were not exactly superheroes. But that all changed in 1978 when Warner released the first major superhero movie, featuring the genre's most iconic character, Superman. Directed by Richard Donner and starring Christopher Reeve, was a surprise box office hit and a cinematic gem that has aged beautifully. Many actors played Superman after that, though Reeve remains the first to give him his classic essence. Speaking of iconic characters, Warner gave The Dark Knight a chance to shine on film. In 1989, Batman took audiences by surprise with a very dark and twisted setting, a trademark of Tim Burton's ingenuity. At the time, there was a stigma that comic books were exclusively for kids, but they were very wrong. Both Batman and Superman were the first films to prove that superheroes could tell serious stories without being ridiculous or childish. But like every trend in the entertainment industry, superheroes exploded in popularity, and the genre was overexploited by different production companies. Howard the Duck, Spawn, Steel, and other 90s movies tarnished what Batman and Superman had started. Well, not even they were spared, as they had infamous sequels that today are memes. During the disastrous decade of the 90s, Marvel ventured with a proposal for adults in 1998. Blade, the famous vampire hunter that took the first steps towards the resurgence of superheroes. But something bigger was still missing. It all began in 1984 when Orion Pictures acquired an option to purchase the rights to make a film adaptation of the X-Men. Let's remember that at the time, Marvel Comics was going through such a tough financial situation that they had to sell the film rights of many characters. Despite the initial script by Jerry Conway and Jerry Thomas, Orion Pictures was never able to start production on X-Men due to financial problems. Therefore, the legendary Stan Lee comic writers Chris Claremont negotiated with the studio Carolco Pictures for an X-Men adaptation. James Cameron would be involved as producer and his wife Catherine Bigelow as director. In addition, Bob Hosk was considered as Wolverine and Angela Bassett as Storm. However, that project stalled, mostly because of James Cameron's interest in directing a Spider-Man film, but that's a story for another video. Marvel offered the X-Men rights to Columbia Pictures, current owners of the Spider-Man films, even though they weren't interested in those characters. Nobody wanted to adapt the X-Men until the animated series of the 90s showed all the potential they had. After 76 episodes that kept audiences hooked, 20th Century Fox decided to acquire the film rights to the mutants in 1994, along with other characters such as the Fantastic Four. A major studio was finally backing the X-Men. The first scripts were written by Andrew Kevin Walker. Although he was joined by a host of writers to bolster the material, names such as Joss Whedon, but by 1996, they still did not have a definitive script. The first 1994 script, written by Andrew Kevin Walker, told how the original film, X-Men, consisting of Professor X, Cyclops, Jean Grey, the Iceman, Angel, Beast, and a new member named Wolverine, faced Magneto's Brotherhood of Mutants while under attack by Sentinels. The mutation theme would be addressed from the nearby Chernobyl accident. The second 1998 script, written by Michael Chabon, focused on two new members of the X-Men, Jubilee and Wolverine, while leaving the threat of the Brotherhood in the shadows to exploit the conflict in a hypothetical sequel. Although many elements were discarded, the combination of both scripts was key to the final result. In February of that same year, Fox released a low-budget TV movie called Generation X. As this name implies, It was a film based on the comic book of the same name, starring young mutants. While the idea was good, the execution was the opposite, ending up in a disappointing movie with lousy reviews that threw away a possible TV series of those characters. For better or worse, that was Fox's first step into the X-Men. Names like Brett Ratner, responsible for the famous Rush Hour saga, was considered to direct the film, as well as Robert Rodriguez and Paul W.S. Anderson, but all turned down the offer. In the end, Bryan Singer ended up taking the role after his incredible work on The Usual Suspects, even though he had previously been offered to direct the fourth installment of the Alien saga. As for the script, Ed Solomon was hired to finish it, although his contribution was not the definitive one, as Bryan Singer, Thomas DeSanto, Christopher McQuarrie, and David Hayter modified it during the development. In conclusion, David Hayter received credit for the script while Singer and DeSanto received credit for the story. On the other hand, McQuarrie and Solomon refused to receive credit because they were unhappy with Fox's treatment. Originally, the film was going to be about all the main mutants manifesting their powers for the first time, but due to time constraints, they preferred to present a formed team. Therefore, only the origins of Magneto and Rogue were shown. Perhaps today we recognize the original X-Men actors as big world stars, and while some of them already were by that time, others were just taking their first steps in the industry. The biggest example of this is Hugh Jackman, who because of his limited experience was not considered the first choice for his starring role. In fact, Russell Crowe was the favorite to play Wolverine, although he had just finished filming Gladiator and did not want to play a similar character. After that, the studio hired Dougray Scott, but he had to resign to give priority to the production of Mission Impossible 2, where he played the villain. Fox reviewed many names for the role, from Keanu Reeves to Mel Gibson. They even gave a small chance to musician Glenn Danzig, although he was busy with his music career. After a fruitless search, Fox heeded the suggestion of Russell Crowe, who noticed the potential of a Hugh Jackman. The rest is history. As for the role of Rogue, a very important character in this film, Natalie Portman, Drew Barrymore, Christina Ricci, and other well-known actresses of the time were considered. In the end, the talented Anna Paquin, who won an Oscar for Best Supporting Actress at 11, took the role of Rogue. For the role of Jean Grey, Selma Blair, Lucy Lawless, and Helen Hunt were considered before Famke Janssen assumed the role of the Dark Phoenix. On the other hand, Jim Caviezel was hired for the role of Cyclops, but had to quit to film Frequency with Dennis Quaid. His position was replaced by James Marsden, who was just starting as an actor. As surprising as it may sound, Michael Jackson himself, a lifelong fan of the comics, showed interest in playing Professor X. He even showed up personally at Fox's offices to apply for the role, but the studio never took his proposal seriously. Moreover, director Bryan Singer always had Patrick Stewart in mind for the role, even before production began. As for Magneto, Christopher Lee, Terrence Stamp, the actor who voiced him in the animated series, were considered for that role, but in the end, Ian McKellen was the chosen one. Speaking of which, Singer had to modify the entire shooting schedule so that McKellen could make it to the Lord of the Rings shoots on time. Likewise, he forbade the entire cast to read the original comics, as his vision was based on the animated series of the 90s. Beyond the fact that some of the actors were first-timers, Fox bet a lot on this project with $75 million, an amount that today seems small for a superhero movie, but at the same time, it was a big amount back then. However, that didn't stop some curious things from happening during the filming. The use of contact lenses and makeup caused several problems for the cast. Rebecca Romijn could only wear her yellow contact lenses for 1 hour a day. During that hour, she could only see 10% of her vision. The Sabretooth actor wore his contact lenses for too long and went blind for a whole day. Halle Berry, on the other hand, wore her contacts for only a short amount of time and found them unbearable, asking to have her eyes bleached with CGI. Did you know that this was the first film in which Stan Lee made a cameo? Before his death, it was unimaginable to think of a Marvel movie without Stan Lee's trademark cameo. 2000's X-Men was also the first film in which the famous Marvel editor began the tradition that has been repeated in all subsequent Marvel comic book adaptations up to Avengers Endgame. Among so many spectacular action scenes and special effects, it seems unbelievable that the final scene was one of the most complicated to shoot because it's just two people playing chess. It turns out that neither Patrick Stewart nor Ian McKellen knew how to play chess, so Fox hired a professional chess player to teach them the basic moves. With some filming complications, but with a studio and crew determined to surprise the world, X-Men hit US theaters on July 14, 2000. Fox's gamble paid off, as it almost reached the incredible amount of $300 million. A huge box office success for the time. Certainly it is not a perfect movie, as there were some divisions among fans and critics for some aspects of this narrative, and the lack of development of some characters. Still, most fans love seeing their favorite characters adapted to the big screen while maintaining the original essence of the comics. With an issue that pits two radically different views of mutants against each other, X-Men was the film that resurrected the superhero genre and set a new path for the stories to come. Marvel's mutants have always been characterized by going against the superheroic ideal. Instead of being admired by society, they are hunted as criminals just for being different, a problem that alludes to the fight against racism, discrimination, and homophobia. This success was the beginning of a new life for the Marvel characters, whose rights were divided among several companies. Sony released in 2002 the first Spider-Man movie starring Tobey Maguire, whose sequel would arrive 2 years later. Universal in 2003 did the same with Hulk, with director Ang Lee. Also from Fox came the adaptation of the Fantastic Four in 2005 and its sequel in 2007. DC, Marvel's main competitor, was not far behind either, as in 2005 they released Batman Begins, starting the legendary trilogy of The Dark Knight with Christopher Nolan. Of course, X-Men derived into an entire film saga, with sequels, spin-offs, and prequels that came to an end in 2019 with X-Men Dark Phoenix, although Deadpool continues to make his own. And then finally came 2008, when Marvel Studios was official and they started the MCU. Younger fans may have missed out on the early X-Men movies, but it's undeniable that they began the new millennium with a bang, being a key pillar for superheroes to dominate cinema. Now that Fox is a part of Disney, it's only a matter of time before the mutants cross paths with the Avengers on the big screen, and what better way than Deadpool as the bridge between the two worlds.